Welcome to the Country Watch Political Intelligence Briefing Quick Hits, a weekly briefing of hot stories across the world in brief. I'm Denise Youngblood-Coleman, the Chief Editorial Officer and Senior International Affairs Analyst at Country Watch. This week I'm featuring Finland and Sweden as they move towards NATO accession. To date, Finland and Sweden have been non-aligned militarily. The Russian invasion of Ukraine changed the calculus of both countries, compelling them to pursue NATO accession in the face of clear Russian aggression. Because of NATO's Article 5 commitment that an attack on one member state would be viewed as an attack on all, with no obligation for mutual defense, NATO participation could well be viewed as the only sensible solution for any country in Europe, given Russian expansionist aggression. Finnish Prime Minister Sanna Marin was very clear in saying that her country would seek to become a NATO member on an accelerated basis, and that Russian aggression was the reason for that path. The 200 members of the parliament in the Finnish Eduskunta received a government-commissioned white paper that assessed the implications of NATO membership in mid-April 2022. Then debate began in parliament. Speaking of the choice before them, Prime Minister Marin said, "Unity is the best guarantee of security." It should be noted that as Russia was carrying out its brutal attack in Ukraine, Finnish citizens were preparing to defend themselves against a possible invasion by Russia. Defense classes on wartime shooting, cybersecurity, and how to manage the first days of an invasion from abroad were immediately filled. Invasion by Russia was something seared into the memory of Finland. Let's take a little walk down memory lane. In 1809, Russia added Finland to its empire. In 1917, Finland declared independence from Russia, which was busy with domestic affairs at the time, namely revolution. But 22 years later, in 1939, the Soviet military invaded Finland, sparking the Winter War. Despite being outnumbered, the Finnish army used snipers and Molotov cocktails, invented by Finland and now used in Ukraine to repel Russians, to stave off the enemy. The Moscow Armistice was finally signed in 1944, ending the war, but also ceding 10% of Finland's territory to the Soviet Empire. Since that time, Finland has been militarily unaligned in order to coexist with the Soviets, and later the successor state of Russia, on its more than 800-mile border. But also since that time, Finland has been preparing for another Russian invasion. Finland requires all men to serve in the military or an equivalent national service. The army is made up of 280,000 soldiers, and there are an additional 900,000 reservists in a country of about 5.3 million. That's a lot. As well, the country spends more than 2% of its gross domestic product on defense. The capital city of Helsinki boasts more than 5,000 bomb shelters, and the subway system also functions as an emergency bomb shelter with many civilian facilities built into the system. It also has a supply of food for about 2 weeks for those seeking shelter there. In addition to being militarily ready, Finland's modern culture is textured by readiness to defend the country with determination. The Finnish word sisu, meaning strength of will, is emblematic in the Finnish ethos, which was forged from the history of invasion by the Soviets. And now, with Russian aggression on full display, there was a strong popular support for NATO accession in a country that viewed Russia as the biggest threat to its national security. In mid-May 2022, Finland said it would discard decades of neutrality and join the NATO security bloc. Finnish Prime Minister Marin said that the decision would have to be ratified by the country's parliament before Finland could formally seek membership of the alliance. To that end, a vote ensued in the Finnish parliament on May 17, 2022 on the matter. The outcome was not ambiguous. The vote was not close. Instead, the Finnish parliament voted overwhelmingly to ratify accession to NATO, with 182 members of parliament voting for it and only 8 votes against it. In Sweden, the ruling Social Democratic Party, as well as the Swedes generally, have in the past been opposed to NATO membership. But since the Russian war in Ukraine, the Social Democrats and the Swedish people have signaled interest in reviewing this posture. By mid-May 2022, as Russia was intensifying its assault in eastern Ukraine, Sweden had announced that it would work towards NATO membership. Swedish Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson made public her party's support for NATO accession, saying, and I quote, "For us Social Democrats, the military non-alliance policy has served us well, but our analysis shows that it will not serve us as well in the future. This is not a decision that we have taken lightly," unquote. She added that Sweden must adapt to reality. Finland and Sweden then made this historic step of officially submitting their applications to NATO. The head of the Security Alliance, Jens Stoltenberg, hailed the momentous occasion, declaring that he was honored to receive the applications for Finland's and Sweden's membership in NATO. He added, and I quote, "This is a good day at a critical time for our security. Your applications are an historic step," unquote. Accession to NATO would not be easy, given objections by some NATO countries, such as Turkey, to fast-track membership. However, the United States was supportive of the move, with the United States President Joe Biden warmly welcoming both the Prime Minister of Sweden and the President of Finland to the White House and to NATO membership. Ironically, the very thing that Russian President Vladimir Putin had sought to prevent with his aggression in Ukraine and with his nuclear threats to the West, the expansion of NATO, was very likely happening. Indeed, with Finland and Sweden in NATO, the NATO forces would conceivably be located right on the Finnish-Russian frontier. Other stories I'm covering this week include Sri Lanka. Since April 2022, there have been nationwide street protests in Sri Lanka as people took to the streets, placing pressure on President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and demanding that his brother, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, resign from office. At issue, the worst economic crisis since independence in 1948. The economic crisis was sparked partially because of the damage to the tourism sector by the terrorist attacks of recent years and the pandemic. It was exacerbated by the financial mismanagement by the Rajapaksa brothers, leading to pharmaceutical, fuel, and food shortages, as well as extended power outages. The crisis took on a dire complexion when Sri Lanka defaulted on about 50 billion worth of foreign loans. This was the first default in Sri Lanka's history as an independent nation-state. The situation became more grim for the Rajapaksa dynasty when allies broke ranks and added their voices to the demand for Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa to go. The calls fell on deaf ears at the time, with the Prime Minister insisting that he still had the support of the majority of the ruling party lawmakers in Parliament. But soon the financial crisis had turned into a national crisis. In addition to the ongoing large-scale demonstrations, protesters had been camped out outside the presidential office on the capital of Colombo for about a month. By the start of May 2022, a group of students had tried to storm the parliament and were met with police firing tear gas. Later in the month, there was a crippling nationwide strike involving public and private sector employees, bringing the country to a standstill. The strike had been called by trade unions and civil organizations and was joined by workers from across the spectrum. As the month went on, the country was being rocked by mass violent protests that left several people dead and hundreds injured. Amid this climate, the beleaguered Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa was forced to resign from office. In fact, as protesters breached his compound to Temple Trees, Mahinda Rajapaksa had to flee his estate in search of safety. In his wake, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, and let me mention that he is the brother, appointed Ranil Wickremesinghe to become the new prime minister. But in fact, the new head of government was actually an old face in Sri Lankan politics, having served as prime minister before. It was unclear if Wickremesinghe would have the technocratic acumen to guide Sri Lanka through its financial fiasco, which had been many years in the making. That being said, blame could nonetheless be placed on the Rajapaksa dynasty, which over the years at the helm took out loans from China as part of that country's Belt and Road Initiative. That initiative had facilitated Chinese infrastructure investment in countries across the world, including Sri Lanka, while also placing those countries into a landscape of vulnerability to Beijing if they defaulted on debt payments. That possibility came to pass in the case of a port project when Sri Lanka was forced to turn over to Beijing's control when it could not pay back the loans. Under the presidency of Gotabaya Rajapaksa, taxes were slashed despite increasing foreign debts and dwindling foreign currency reserves, essentially stopping the country from being able to purchase foreign countries' reserves. In a failed bid to serve the country's situation, a ban on imported chemical fertilizers was implemented in 2021. All it accomplished was damage to the agricultural sector. The major task before the new Prime Minister would be to procure financial assistance from the International Monetary Fund. Such a deal would likely take months to procure and would inevitably entail restructuring of Sri Lanka's debt. In Lebanon, parliamentary elections took place in the shadow of the anti-government protests of 2019, the deadly Beirut blasts of 2020, the economic crisis of 2021, and the ongoing political instability that has rocked the country in recent years. With a fragmented and disorganized opposition, the conventional wisdom has been that Iran-backed Hezbollah and its ally Amal were expected to be the most successful parties in these elections. But Lebanese voters actually upended that conventional wisdom. Early election results indicated some degree of an upset, with Hezbollah and its allies, including the Free Patriotic Movement of President Aoun, seeing some unexpected losses. As a corollary to the unexpected election losses for Hezbollah and its allies was the performance of the main opposition party, the Saudi-aligned Lebanese Forces. Indeed, Lebanese Forces was poised to gain seats and possibly overtake the Free Patriotic Movement as the biggest Christian party in parliament. Several independents were also seeing success with their change agenda campaigns and would also hold seats in the new parliament. The precise makeup of the new parliament was unknown at this time. However, it was apparent that Hezbollah and its allies had been dealt a blow. Indeed, in the new parliament, Hezbollah's powers would be diluted, the opposition would be boosted, and the rise of the independent politicians meant that there would be new voices to accommodate. Next week, I'll be looking at the Australian election, where the Australian Conservative Liberal National Coalition was seeking re-election, but opposition Labour was leading in the polls. The Colombian presidential election is also coming up. I'll also continue to cover the war in Ukraine and Russia's ongoing trouble in meeting its goals, as well as the digital war landscape. Across the world in Somalia, United States troops have been sent to fight that country against Islamic terrorist group Al-Shabaab. Subscribers can read more about these and other stories at the Country Watch website, www.countrywatch.com. I'd also like to take this time to mention my comprehensive Afghanistan withdrawal report called Sunset in the Graveyard of Empires. Let me repeat that, Sunset in the Graveyard of Empires, which is available for purchase from the Country Watch website at www.countrywatch.com, as well as on Amazon. Thank you for your time. Have a great day, and remember, now more than ever, we live in an interconnected world.